The day is February 6th, year 2025, and I'm out here in rural Southwest Virginia to see one of my new favorite writers that I've been introduced to over the last year, Henry Wise. And like many great people I met Henry at the Mississippi Book Festival under the Lemuria tent. And I got to shout out folks at Lemuria and specifically Caleb and Hillary for introducing me to Henry, because what a joy it's been to read his debut novel, Holy City, and to get to know him. He's going to be coming to City Lights Bookstore in March as well. And I just love when these connections happen, because it just shows you when you build community and real friendship with people, that begets more friends. And you can never have enough friends in this world. And that's why I'm so happy that I'm now friends with Henry and I'm here today. And we're meeting at his family farmhouse from the 1830s outside of Staunton, Virginia. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this landscape, it is different than southern Appalachia, where I live in western North Carolina, and more central Appalachia, coal country, right? Eastern Kentucky, West Virginia. This part of Virginia has a strange amalgam of southern Appalachian traits. The mountains might be a little bit smaller, but there's more meadows and rolling hills, and there's not as much chiseled rock that you find in other parts of this region. And there's also a colonial feel that you do not get down where I live and in many other parts of this region. And so it's a peculiar place in that regard. And I just love the history in Virginia. And so I'm just giddy to be here in general and explore Lexington a little bit. I've been here, one time before, and it's a cool town. Henry is 33 or something on the list of family members that have attended VMI. So, I had to come here and pay homage to the Wise family and their legacy here at this institution. But yeah, it doesn't get better than this. Henry is such a cool dude. This book, Holy City, debut or not, is so good. The story is so compelling, with themes of grief and justice and retribution and the nature of exile and keeping away from a place that haunts you. But then what happens when you return and you're forced to confront these traumas and painful memories and try to do the right thing. And the main character, Will Seams, is such a genuine, earnest person that you're going to want to know what happens with him in his life. But this story is littered with really good, deep characters. Yes, the crime part of it is obviously interesting, but then there's also this ever-present other place, this third place that still feels central to the story, that is creepy. And you also want to know what's going on out here. But we'll talk all about Holy City, why we're here at this old farmhouse in rural Virginia, and I'm sure an incredible group of 6 books on the bed that Henry chooses. I already know he's a damn fine reader, so you're going to want to listen to what he has to say about these books. He's a teacher, he's a writer himself, but above all else, he is a good teacher and writer because he's a good reader. So I could not be more excited. The prospect of going to this farmhouse and talking about books with Henry is going to get me through the blues of this rainy day morning. So I can't wait for you all to hear this conversation, and I'll see you at the farmhouse. You're listening to Books on the Bed, where I travel through the country asking our hosts, if I came to your town and stayed at your house, what books would you put on my bed? Each host will share 6 books for me to carry with me on the journey of my life. And I'm here to share those books with you. As we go, we're building a digital library with every book put on every bed across the country. And who knows, maybe someday, the world. We are trying to share as many diverse stories as possible to part a curtain between us and bring us closer to each other. We hope these books and conversations make a meaningful difference in your life. Thank you for listening and being with us on this journey. Well, before we get to where the hell we are, which is awesome. I think you know what we're going to start with.
Oh.
Gifts for my lord, Henry Wise.
All right. Should I go ahead and open?
Hey, tear it up. See what's inside. And then I'll give some context of why I picked these gifts.
Hell of a wrapping job. I'm very
pretty
impressed.
good. I'm pretty good.
Awesome. Shutter, Ramona Emerson, Exposure.
So these
I'm sort of getting a photography vibe. That's cool.
Yeah. See, so I knew. So there's a couple reasons I picked this pair of books, which is Ramona Emerson. She is a Navajo writer in New Mexico who comes from a photography and film background. And when I thought about getting you gifts, I was like, okay, well, we have to play up the photography angle, despite the fact that you're a novelist. I mean, Welty, come on, there's so many people that have written, that have loved photography and have done that. So that's part of it. And the other part of it is Ramona's writing these stories about a detective who is facing not exact, but similar circumstances to Will Seams. Mm-hmm. So her life, Rita, the protagonist, is split between Albuquerque and her past life, her family legacy on the reservation. And
that sounds very familiar.
Especially in the first one, Shutter, her grandmother plays a big part in the story. And one of the things that you can see is that Navajo legacy culture fading away and the sadness of that, and not knowing, where does she belong? Back in this old world with the people that she comes from literally, or, in this new city where she's nobody. And the cool thing about this too, though, is it's about being able to see ghosts as a forensic photographer.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting.
And so she gets caught up in a big case with like drug ring and politicians, cops, corrupt cops, all that, because she has this ability to see. So the second one, Exposure, is the next in the series. And so Shutter was the debut, and I just thought you'd appreciate the story and the photography component.
It sounds like it's right up my alley. And there's something about being divided that I've always felt personally. I don't think I intentionally brought that out in my book, but it makes characters interesting when they're not sure where they, like this house. I've got a foot in this world, but I didn't grow up here. My grandmother grew up here. It's
you're not here nor there.
Right.
And I think, I know you'll relate to Rita, and not necessarily to the extent where, you're shuttling back and forth between worlds as much as she is, but it's just that idea of like, I know where I'm from, technically. I know where I am, but it's hard to claim it. And it leaves you in this in-between that it's difficult on a person to know who they are when they can't even say where they belong. So anyway, I'm excited for you to read those. And
thank you.
And I hope too, through this, that we start sharing books across regions, across cultures. That's a big deal for me with the gift giving and the books on the bed, is just letting people know like, hey, there's a Henry Wise down in New Mexico and everywhere else that are writing good stories, but also that you are writing these good stories, and I'll share yours to the ends of the earth and back as well.
Yeah, that's it's really cool to think about. Despite the vast differences between New Mexico and Virginia, there are some similarities. You can see that because of the themes.
No doubt.
And I didn't know that this person was writing until now. That's really cool.
Yeah. And I love debut authors. Yeah. So I tend to try to promote them in both making events for them so that they have a chance to showcase it, putting debuts on my staff picks. And obviously you're in our store now and are going to come. So that's really exciting. But there's one more gift before we move on that I suppose could be for you as well, but I'd like you to share with your children.
Oh, thank you. Again, impeccable wrapping.
It is one of my many skills in life. that is underappreciated.
Awesome. Oh, man. I know her. I mean, I know
Yeah.
of her.
Well, the reason
I've read some of her poems. Yeah.
I wanted to get you this, but also your children, because you are a poet
Yeah.
from the jump. And you ended up writing a novel, and it's beautiful, but you can tell your language is still infused with that heart of poetry, that observational sense of poetry. And Naomi is going to be on Books on the Bed. I'm visiting her in San Antonio in March.
Awesome.
And it just hit me when I saw this book in City Lights. I was like, we need the spirit of poets and people like Naomi to help guide us through what's going to be a turbulent few years, if not just forever. So I just hope that you share this with your kids. And it's cool to know that you come from a poetry background, because it makes a lot more sense reading your novel and understanding you as a person.
It's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And it's Honeybee, the book. I figured you would at least know who she is.
Yeah, I didn't even know where she was from.
She's Texan.
Yeah, wow, that's cool.
But I'm excited to meet with her. But I just thought this would be a good thing for keeping people in good spirits and to remember the shared humanity we have. And poets bring that out better than anybody, I believe.
That's great. And my kids, even though they're very young, love to read. And
how could they
they've
not?
always got books. Even the 1-year-old who can't do it, she'll pick up a book and she'll walk over to me and she'll just kind of sit there and rock back and forth until I read it. She won't leave me alone.
She's yearning for it.
Yeah.
Hey, put it on the bookshelf for later.
Thank you. It's so important. I think people are just so drawn to story, even people who don't write. I think that's how we learn, And I just think storytelling, hearing stories, it helps people learn about what characters do in certain situations. I mean, there's all these, even fiction has that ability to speak to the truth of somebody who is facing some sort of conflict.
Yeah. And that's our whole lives. And I think we look to fiction and poetry to help us navigate. Anne Lamott put something online recently about stories holding us together. And we learn how to behave through stories. We learn how to persevere, how to deal with grief and sadness when we feel so alone in that. Certain characters can give us a companionship that we otherwise wouldn't have, depending on our lot in life, And not only for kids, even as adults, we have all these things happen in life, and we sometimes don't know where else to turn but to a book or a movie or a show. And so, stories can help guide us through turbulent times and help us appreciate the beautiful things a lot more than we do when we're missing it. And right now, that's how I feel.
Yeah. I recently had the stomach bug like a couple weeks ago. It was terrible. And somehow I came across some video of by Ethan Hawke, who, I think you and I may have talked about or I heard you in a recent interview talking about Wildcat, and I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen it yet. But he was talking just about art, like poetry. And I'm sure that, this is something that a lot of people have seen, but it spoke truth to me. He said, a lot of people think poetry is, you can discard it. You don't really need it. And then you lose something, or you fall in love or something. And then poetry, it ceases to be optional, and it becomes sustenance.
Yes.
It's not just like something you pick off the shelf. It's like you need it.
I actually have that video saved.
It's awesome.
And Ethan Hawke is one of those people that no matter how famous he's gotten, you can tell the core of him is still the same as it was when he played in Dead Poets Society.
Yeah.
My favorite character of his is in The Good Lord Bird when he plays John Brown. I mean, because James McBride's one of my favorite authors. And when I saw Ethan Hawke take that part, it's like, but I think Ethan, it just felt so right that he was in that role. And it makes sense that he and James would get along because he's a true artist, and he doesn't mince his words when it comes to how important it is. And I think that's where we're at. Like, I mean, even the last few weeks, I've started thinking like, man, should I even do any of this? You get really paralyzed. I'm like, well, now more than ever. Like,
yeah, totally.
We need these types of exchanges. We need stories to be shared between each other. And even like you coming down to North Carolina, right? That's so important. We need to spend time together. And that's why I'm just so excited to be here and thankful for it, man.
Yeah.
Like truly, I loved reading Holy City. And similar, I told you with S.A. Cosby's Blacktop Wasteland, not a book I'm typically like, oh, I'm going to pick that out on the shelf.
Right.
And part of it is if I meet anybody through Lemuria books, yeah, like they're my friend. I can trust that. But yeah, I read it in a couple of days because I was so amazed at how you wrote such a, gritty is a word for it, dark, I suppose, but it's a difficult book in many regards, but it's also a very beautiful book.
Oh, thank you.
And if you can tap into both of those things, I'm glued. So anyway, the gifts are to thank you for writing a book and sharing it with us. And I hope that I can sell it as much as I can, both in my job and just when I'm hanging out and see people in the streets.
I appreciate it. Yeah. I think I was saying a minute ago, I was convinced that it would never be published. I've said that in other interviews too, but the fact that it's been nominated for the Edgar, it blows my mind, but it also means kind of like all those years of not having any representation of all the rejections. Actually, I was doing something, and back then I wasn't sure I was doing something.
Yeah, you always think, what's it for, until you know.
And so,
right? And I'm so happy for you because it truly is such a good story.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm really drawn to Virginia stories, as you can tell. Funny enough, I was just up I saw that your great-great-great-grandfather was buried at the Hollywood Cemetery.
That's right.
In Richmond, and I was walking through there, and I didn't even know that. Just a few months ago when I was with Rachel Beanland,
wow.
and who wrote The House is on Fire, which takes place in Richmond. And I feel like Virginians, they get it with storytelling, man. There's so many talented writers in Virginia. I feel like per capita, a lot more than you would think across the whole state. And you're one of them. And I'm just so glad I've found you.
Well, thank you. And that's one reason I wanted to come here today. This is a place surrounded by stories. I was raised on both sides of my family, just very fortunate to be raised around a lot of storytelling. And, in my family, stories are repeated all the time. Yet still there's the delivery. It's you either tell it right or you don't. And you try to stick the landing. And that kind of storytelling, I think, worked its way in because there are just all these layers. As I was saying earlier, Virginia's Southern, definitely, but it's also more than Southern. And some Southern states are pretty much, they were founded as Southern states. But Virginia has the colonial stuff. Virginia has, the earliest European settlements. My family came over, my dad's side of the family came over in 1635 to the eastern shore of Virginia. And we're there for pretty much until last century. And there's still a presence there, but those layers, being here in the Shenandoah Valley, having the eastern and the south side Virginia connections, I feel like within Virginia there's a hell of a lot of diversity.
Oh man,
and
yeah, because what is it, Clinton Farm, where your family?
Oh yeah,
is all the way. I mean, as eastern Virginia as you can get.
Yeah,
on the other side of the bay.
Yeah,
I forget what county that is.
Accomack.
Yeah,
yeah.
So it's like you could not have a different vibe and history than here.
When Virginia was deciding what it was going to do in the Civil War, obviously it's a tricky place to be because one way or the other, you're going to be involved. And something that's fascinating about Virginia is depending on the region, they used to say it was the mountains, Piedmont, and Tidewater. It's basically the same, but I think they use different names now. But each one of those regions represents a different part of the South. Like the Tidewater and Southside Virginia feel like Deep South. Then you get to the mountains and it feels like, it's Appalachia.
Yeah.
And so there's this just a very interesting spread of culture within the state.
Yeah. Well, because of talking about history and your deep, deep family history in the state, can you talk about the significance of, well, first of all, where are we right now so that people can understand how awesome this is? And why did you bring me here? What role has it played in your life and in your stories?
Yeah, so we are at the farm that's been in the Churchman family. That's my mom's side of the family. The land has been in the family since 1826, I believe. And the house was built in 1834. we are in the old part of the house, which has had no renovation. The original French wallpaper, dating back to the 1820s, is hanging from the walls here, in some places in slight tatters, a little bit moth-eaten, but pretty incredibly intact when you think of what it is.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And I don't want to leave.
It's a panoramic image of the gardens at Versailles. As far as I can tell, nothing repeats. I mean, it's a completely every panel is a new.
Like when I'm in this room, it makes me realize how cheap our world is, how much we were robbed of this sort of detail and originality. Not saying everything was completely original, but think about, look how unique this room is.
Yeah.
Gosh, man, I can't. This is such a good idea. But anyway, continue with the significance of the home.
So, I mean, of course, my sisters and I were raised coming here as often as we could. I mean, my mom was the same way when she was growing up, and this is home to her. My grandmother grew up here during the Great Depression doing her homework by candlelight. My grandfather, who was a pilot, he learned to fly when he was 10 years old because he was living across from a rural hangar. And I assume crop dusting, but I really don't know. And he could fly a plane on his own without anybody else in it when he was 12, I'm told. He also flew in World War II, but when he was courting my grandmother, trying to impress her, he flew over these fields and he dropped a crate of records.
Oh my gosh.
On a parachute. And they fell so far from the house, she had to hike over to get the crate, and every record was broken.
Oh, yeah. It seems like, how did he not know that? But still, what a baller move.
Yeah. He also, when she was going on a date with somebody else, he made her late. So he was like, well, I'm going to have to fly you there. This was at a college, I guess, a couple hours away. He's like, well, I'm going to have to fly you. And so he made sure that he was their chaperone and nothing could happen.
Yo, that's wild. I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah. So this really, bringing you here, so few interviews are in person these days. And, so I'm grateful for this opportunity. And, I was thinking, well, what location would be kind of conducive and totally original? Like, I share this whenever I can. I don't own it. My direct family doesn't own it, but my mother's cousin owns it now. And the way that she kind of sees her responsibilities is the house belongs to the family. And they're more stewards of the house than, they are owners, but there's a lot of responsibility that comes with something like this. And
yeah, you don't want to lose it.
No.
It's so special. Even my whole, I don't know if I had a bad day, but as we were talking about before, it was gross this morning.
Right.
And how great that the sun started coming out right when we got here. Oh, the sunlight, it's warm finally. But it's like when we pulled up, my whole spirit started changing because you could feel the weight of a place and how lived in it's been and like stories all around. And that's just like you can't replicate that. Pulling up to a unique spot that's part of someone's family history. And that's why this stuff gets me so excited. I wouldn't be able to do it on a computer. And not that everybody brings me to a historical place, but even in their homes, there are things that make it feel like them. And that's what's really cool, is to be a part of that. And as you know, with me, I want to feel like a part of something that is so much bigger than even a recording. Like the whole day, the whole experience, us meeting up at an abandoned gas station that hasn't been in business for 15 years, feels like we're doing a drug deal on the side of a rural highway, and then just driving over here, pulling up. It's cool, man. It's just super cool. And this house feels like a great movie setting.
So my mom's cousin was just telling me, before they owned it, back when they were filming Gods and Generals, the Civil War movie in Lexington, they actually were scouting this house.
Wow.
But they would need to do too much to get it to, I guess, whatever they would want to use it for. But
well, that's why I also felt your book could easily be a movie. for
Thank you.
show.
I
Like it
appreciate
gave me those vibes where I was like, especially when they end up going to, I won't give anything away, but going to Snakefoot,
Yep.
it just gave me that sense of like, this would be a climactic visual to like experience, So I would be really cool.
Yeah.
Can I ask how this house though has influenced the imagination of your stories?
Definitely. A lot of people don't really know that much about their family history, but even those who do don't always have a place to associate with it. And not only is this an important family place, there are so many layers of this place to me. And one of them is simply the time layer. You step into these rooms and you are stepping back in time. It's preserved. Nothing has been done to renovate this and change it. The hallway, the circular hallway, the walls are cracked a little bit, but it's like it ages kind of like a wine. Not that I'm a wine connoisseur, but it ages sort of in the way that it develops its own character with that time. And so it's perfect as it is, even though it represents a time that's long gone.
Yeah.
It's also now. It's certainly influenced my work. And I mean, there are direct, of course, this house inspired Will Seam's house.
Yeah.
There's no question, just without the people in it.
Yeah. Even just coming here, it makes a lot more sense why you wrote the story the way you did, and the dichotomy between Richmond and this sort of country out here is a really good way to play on exile.
Yeah.
And when I saw that you had brought Lord Jim, My Antonia, it reminded me, True Grit.
Yeah.
Wait, were all of these maybe even in that? No, not all of them. You wrote you picked a bunch of books for exile in fiction because that's such,
true.
I mean, that's true. That is what Will Seams, your protagonist, is experiencing. I think the language even used on that website was keeping away from a place, which I found unique because I never thought about it with that language. Keeping away, we always think staying away.
Yeah, a couple of these were on that list, and that idea of exile is really interesting to me. And so we're in the Shenandoah Valley, Mint Spring, which is outside of Staunton. The farm is called Chapel Hill. So I kind of use this house for its history and everything, but I actually set the book in Southside Virginia, tobacco country, which it could have been here too, but there's something about Southside Virginia that feels remote. It's a blip on a lot of people's radar, and just not a lot of people know about it. And there isn't much of an economy anymore. I mean, I think it used to be a very strong tobacco area, and now it's very hard to, especially for your small farmer, it's impossible to grow tobacco. So some people have turned to soy, but what you've got is a large population of people who don't really have great work. There's a term for that part of Virginia that I cannot remember, but I cannot even remember the term, but it indicates sort of not a very prosperous belt. You've
talked about this, but Richmond's done well as a southern city. And so Will Seams is there for a long time, years, and is driven back home by guilt.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious how that guilt, or why you picked a character so motivated by it.
Yeah, it's a good question. Part of it just developed without necessarily trying to force it. I think it was organic, but guilt is a powerful motivator, and we've all done things or not behaved always as we would like to, and I think so. That's a very human thing there. But he is motivated by tremendous guilt. I mean, he's lost his mother. We sort of find out a little bit more about that throughout, and he's blaming himself for that in ways that I think are unfair, but what he really feels guilty about is something that happened to his friend, Sam Hatham. So these two sources of guilt kind of conflate in a way. And so his mother's death is kind of it becomes almost racial.
Yeah.
Sam is black, Will is white. They're kind of brothers in a sense. They're even Sam's mother considers them that way. They're family. But that sort of makes his mother's death somehow a racial issue. And I just found that very interesting. I mean, talk about boundaries. I mean, there are all these boundaries in the book. And guilt is one of those, like, because it's hard to pin down guilt, and sometimes it's illogical.
Yeah. Well, and guilt then leading to vengeance.
Yeah.
You know, you talk a lot about justice, which I find always a really interesting thing in stories. Who defines it? Yeah. And especially when it's outside the legal bounds of justice, because let's get real. You're not going to get justice if you only put your trust and faith in the legal system. Sometimes you might. Then you get this guilt that is driving a need to rectify what you felt like you did wrong. And I think the stressful part about Will's story for me, and maybe even a part of the reason why I wanted to get done sooner, I was reading it both because it was awesome and I needed it to be over. Yeah. Because even like, I love characters that have peculiar nighttime habits. Yeah. I've realized that. Yeah. Like, you know, Light Sleeper is one of my favorite movies with Willem Dafoe. And I just love anxious people who can't figure out, you know, like what to do with themselves. So in the night, they just have these bizarre things. And Will ends up sleeping in his truck a lot at where he feels the most guilt. And it's like, dude, you're going literally every night to where you most hate yourself.
I know.
And so, but that's the thing, is like, he's such a gripping character because, like, what are you doing?
Yeah. And for me too, that's something that fascinated me, because I was like, why are you doing this? But, you know, sometimes there is a spring, you know, you can have a positive spring and you can have a negative spring. And this is kind of a negative spring. And ultimately it does prompt action, not only returning, but it prompts him to do several things that may or may not be wise moves on his part. But you know, but I think just this book in large part is about both the power and the futility of guilt. Where does it get him? Because you can feel guilty all day, but what are you going to do with that? And is it going to end up anywhere? You know, is it going to move anything forward? And also that you brought up justice. Yeah, there's a thin line between justice and revenge sometimes, and we deal with that in this book. And
it's like the closer you got for Will potentially getting that justice that is outside of the justice system, the more you're like, oh my God, what are you going to do? You know, like, you're so close. Like, this is all, because that's the thing, is he hitched so much of his identity on that justice, retribution, making amends, whatever you want to call it, right? His penance was fixing that, which you can't fix. Right. You know, you can't make that unhappen. And so, I mean, even the way he's harboring a fugitive, you know, all these things that he's doing that are misguided come from a place of guilt. And as you said, it can be a positive driver. I mean, one thing that I joke about with a lot of my friends right now, because we're really tired of people not feeling shamed, like, feel ashamed. We're like, please, for the love of God, can somebody feel deep shame and change because of it? Because when you feel ashamed, like, I remember making fun of a kid so bad in fourth grade that he quit the basketball team. Wow. Like, we were a really good, you know, basketball team of, you know, third graders, whatever. The next year, this new kid comes in. We've never seen him before. We decided, you know, we're going to, and I was so, like, I wanted to fit in because I was relatively new at the school, that I just, like, went along with these kids. And, you know, this kid was crying at practice and then decided to quit. And I felt like such an amount of shame that I did everything I could to get him back on the team. And then he became a good friend of mine all through high school. But it was like positively motivated. I was like, this is wrong. I hate myself for this. You need to be better. But in society, the language has shifted to, like, don't be ashamed of yourself. It's like, some things you do are shameful. And for Will, though, he takes it to the max, where it's like, actually, you could be nicer to yourself.
Yeah, you know, it's been interesting because a lot of people, I mean, I had no, like I said, I didn't think the book was going to be published originally. I just stuck with it. But it's been surprising to me that so many people have reached out and said, I hope we see Will Seams again.
Yeah.
And they follow that up by saying, and I mean, people of all walks of life. I mean, it's been really cool. And of all ages, they'll be like, I really liked Will. And I'm kind of thinking, really? Because I'm invested in him, but you never know how somebody's going to translate. And also, I think it's a good thing that people like him even though he's deeply flawed.
Well, I don't like Will Seams, but I appreciate Will Seams because he's all of us. He's struggling with things from his past that just are suffocating him to the point that if he feels like if he doesn't right the wrong, that he'll never be able to move on. He'll never be able to live. And even his relationship with his dad was really interesting to me because so much of it was about like, you need to let go.
Yeah.
And there's also a line between letting go in a healthy way and in a way where you're just ignoring your feelings about something. But I think that's the thing is like Will doesn't ignore anything. And so he is deeply flawed in the ways that he's trying to handle some of these issues. But I think everybody can empathize with him because he's so much just trying to figure it out. And he is trying to do the right thing. And even when he gets caught in a pickle with his job, he's still like, motivated by justice in the right way.
Exactly. He's in earnest about what he's doing, which is more than we can say about some of the other characters.
And he's willing to change. You can see throughout, like even his relationship with the PI that comes in, like what seems like a partnership destined for failure, right? There's a lot of moments where it's people learning about each other and understanding each other. And I just think that for him to be in such an explosive emotional environment for him, like with his past, he's doing a great job. And you are rooting for him. You're like, get some sleep, get a bed. But maybe don't live in the house that brings back some of these traumas. But I actually think that I would say the same thing as those people, other than I wouldn't say I like Will Seams.
I think I'm also tired of people, I've been used to rejection a lot with writing. I mean, and I think any writer who's made it anywhere is familiar with the rejection. And one of the things people will say, no matter what you're working on, one of the reasons that they will reject you is, I didn't like this character. And I actually don't think that's the right
No, that's stupid.
approach, because if you like every character, then there's nothing interesting there.
Yeah.
You could still be compelled to follow a character. I mean, have you ever seen that movie Nightcrawler? Talk about creepy. I'm watching that guy. I want to see what he does.
I love it. Yeah. I think likable is safe. And a lot of publishing is safe.
That's right.
Oh, will this person have empathy? Well, you can have empathy and still hate somebody. I don't like Jim from My Antonia.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we got a lot to talk about.
But I don't like Jim.
Yeah.
But I get I get what he's feeling. I know why he's doing what he's doing. So yeah, I agree. Like I think, but you threaded that line really well between wanting someone to do the right thing, get better, let go of some of that guilt, but also take some of it head on, take accountability for your own actions. There's so many things that are going on, and yet still doesn't reach the level of like, wow, this is a likable guy. I don't know. I want to hang out with Will Seams.
Right.
Which to me means, do I like you? I like you enough to hang out with you for hours.
Appreciate
that. Will is not, I'm not sitting down like this with him until he gets some of his shit figured out. But I want to talk about something, speaking of like unlikable characters, that I saw only briefly in a previous interview that you foreshadowed, and it might not be true, but the Snakefoot region that we're discussing, or that we have discussed, you talk about it as a harbor for misfits and outcasts and the potential for supernatural. Is that something you're following up on in what you're writing now or intend to write?
Yeah, I'm actually, the second book is focusing almost entirely on the Snakefoot.
Let's go. I mean, because I'm telling you, that to me is where this story felt like, oh, I could even use more of this.
There's a center. It does feel central. It's off to the side, but it's central.
Yeah, it never felt like a central key, but it always felt there.
Yeah.
It was almost like a
like a shadow.
Yeah, that's what it was. And I couldn't even, it was like part of the stories that weren't even dealing with that. You knew it was there because it had such a dark energy.
Yeah.
And what comes to happen in your novel, obviously, sets up really well to continue that exploration of an area that feels less explored, because I love things where people are centering those that are cast aside. Because there's where understanding comes to meet. Like, let's talk about the stories of the place that feels like a shadow in one story. Let's go into the shadows.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about that. And I don't want you to reveal too much, but I needed to ask.
Yeah, I'm not revealing. I won't reveal much at all. But yeah, I actually just shared with my editor the first rough draft. It still needs some work. But that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
And I think he just wants to see kind of where I'm headed, give me a thumbs up, and then I keep working.
Yeah.
But the Snakefoot really interested me. I'm always drawn to wilderness, and wilderness can take so many different forms. But it felt to me very important in a book where somebody is sort of returning from exile to a place that most people would consider a place where you would be exiled. And then within that county, there's even this other layer. It's almost like,
yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about it that way.
It wasn't something that I was planning to do when I started writing. It's just, it felt that a lot of the muscle of the book kind of went into that. And also the Snakefoot kind of emerged. I don't want to shortchange the work that I did, but it was very much organic and almost effortless. When it started coming about, I was like, there it is.
And that's when you know.
Yeah.
Because there's just some things that grip you so much. It's like, I feel when I read about you potentially going that way and your influence from the Great Dismal Swamp.
Yeah.
Which, if anybody wants to use their time more wisely and get off social media and the television and read about that region and what it meant historically for people who were trying to be, invisible.
Yeah. It feels like a source.
Yeah.
There's some things you write and you're kind of like, well, I'm done with that character or something. I feel like there's a lot in the Snakefoot.
Oh man, it's going to be so good. Like I said, Holy City is a wonderful book. I can't wait for you to come read at City Lights. I do want us to have ample time to talk about this awesome stack of books on the bed that you have coming for us. And you can start wherever you'd like and roll with it.
I've got two big stacks here, and I might switch one or two out. But I do think I want to start with Lord Jim. And it's been a long time since I read it. I dip into it occasionally. It's a big book. And talk about a character I'm not sure I like. Jim is a character like that for me. I want to say that this was my dad's copy. It's totally wrecked.
I was going to say, wow, that looks so old.
It's from, not that my dad was born then, but yeah. The inscription, like somebody signed this book to Aunt Susie.
Say 1924?
1924.
Look at that. Oh my God, the tape.
And I've taped it because
I bet that smells so good.
It does. Yeah, it smells sweet.
See, we can be book weird in these conversations, which is I'm glad, because I would put my face in that book.
There's a physicality. There's a physicality to this interview because we can see these books.
Even the way the light's hitting these books right now, and you're like, this is great. Anyway.
Yeah. I think what I'll say about Lord Jim, Joseph Conrad, I think he's become controversial over the years. I mean, Heart of Darkness in some ways is the opposite of this in that it's so brief. Although he does some similar things with storytelling by giving somebody the microphone and letting them run with it for a long time. And you almost forget and you're like, okay, oh, right, this person was telling that story, but it's actually Joseph Conrad is telling the story when they step out of it. But what I learned from Joseph Conrad, I mean, my dad gave me this book a long time ago, just from his library. And I think storytelling, giving somebody the microphone, letting them run with it, but also the depths of psychology really interests me. We're talking here about a guy who abandons ship in a situation that seems very much like if you're going to abandon a ship, this is the time to do it. But it haunts him. And talk about guilt. I mean, his life just follows him. and he tries to get away from it. He tries to face it. He's the only one who sticks around for the trial. Everybody else skips town, from what I remember. And there's this just like, are you trying to punish yourself? You know, and he displays great courage at other times. But there's a line in here, and I'm not sure I would be able to find it, but somebody says the line between right and wrong in this situation was thinner than a piece of paper. And that kind of thing interests me.
Yes, obviously.
And I think that's really a lot of what, you know, when I think about books that have inspired me.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't say, well, I'm going to write a Lord Jim, not only do we have this character in exile, but we've got this person who is truly an enigma, I think, to the reader and probably to himself, and in situations that are so tough to judge for anybody else. And I just, and also the depiction of the Far East of Malaysia, very interesting. I mean, we're dealing with Muslim pilgrims. We're dealing with, you know, it's just not a lot of people have focused on that area.
Mm-mm. Yeah, that's fascinating. You know, I love to see what's revealed of not only connections between the writer and what they write, but just what you value in a story, the things that occupy your curiosity. And you could not have picked a better book to start with, because of so many of the themes that just seem like you're always wondering about them.
Yeah, it's almost become apparent to me more recently than it did when I was writing. It's because of people asking me what books have inspired me. And then I think about it, I'm like, not only did this fill my mind as I think I read this started to read this in my teens, but we're writing about these exotic places which Joseph Conrad has been to. You know, I mean, he is so familiar with them and commands such fine descriptions. But it's also anything but a vacation.
That's a good way to put it.
I mean, it's a hard book to read.
Yeah.
And his particular stamp on modernism, I think, his unsentimental viewing of Jim, who I think of as a pretty romantic character. I mean, idealistic, so idealistic.
Do you feel like you have, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit with liking a character, but in terms of relating to a character, that's always an interesting conversation because, you know, for certain characters that I've loved in books or films or shows, like Russ Cole is a prime example in True Detective, which I get some vibes with what you could write, that there's similarities there. I would never want to be Russ Cole.
No.
Not in a million years.
No.
And yet there are things about him that not only I admire, but I mean, he stretches the limits of my own view of the world and perspective. And so like, it's stressful to watch him. In some ways, he lives an incredibly pathetic life to me, you know, when I'm being most judgmental, I'm like, God, man, you could have gone a lot of different routes than this. This is pretty sad. But to me, it's not like even relating to a character so much as just the character itself being so fascinating.
Yeah. And I think McConaughey actually said something very similar. Like, he was like, I don't think like Russ Cole. Yeah. But I was him for a little bit, you know?
And I feel like you get to do that in these stories.
Yeah.
You're just occupying, or at least you're in the mind, in the life of another person. And even if it's not a place that you want to reside for very long, it's like, well, I'm glad I did it.
Yeah. This book made me a better writer. It's not a book I read often because it's not always pleasant. But
you got to have it on the shelf.
Yeah, it's great.
And you got to share it with someone that's staying at your house, right?
And it's one of those, it is one of those, when I was thinking about this interview, it is one of those that I sort of always have in mind as like, I could dip back into it if I want to.
Yeah.
And it's one of those books that I will do that with, because it reminds me how deep you can get into a character's psyche. And not every author goes there.
No.
And I think he goes deeper into it than I would prefer to go. And sometimes it slows the narrative down, especially for today's tastes.
Oh, yeah. Well,
but the fact that he does it, you're like, if you can stay there, I think you are rewarded for it.
Yeah. Oh, man, I'm glad you said that. Sometimes I wish people were willing to stay with things more to understand that, like, it's not necessarily about it being an enjoyable exercise, but rewarding is very different than enjoyable. Yeah. And if you can just give, especially, but now that we're in an age where I'm curious, like what a 15-year-old would find interesting in a book now, and if they would even like Cather or Conrad or Jim Harrison or Charles Borders. And some stories, would they be willing to stick with it long enough to get to the good stuff? Which in most of these books that I'm looking at, often the only good stuff is in the whole.
Yeah, what I love about novels, and I listened recently to the Jerry Wilson interview, which I loved. And I mean, it's so cool that she writes her debut novel in her 80s. I mean, it's incredible. And I'm glad she's like embracing that.
Heck
now.
yeah. She's awesome.
She started as a short story writer. I wrote a couple of short stories, but I never thought of myself. I wrote short stories because I couldn't figure out how to string together a novel. And for me, it was always about that elbow room and I loved falling into the world, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what I love about these books. It's like, you can't condense them. And if you do, you're just cheating yourself. I mean, Spark Notes is like, you know, you get the bullet points, but you're totally missing the voice.
I think one of the things I hate most about myself, especially before college and until I figured it out in college, that the whole point is the whole thing. Because you're taught to cut corners.
Yeah.
And in some things it makes sense. I find myself cutting corners on an immense amount of things in life now to have time for the good stuff, for the things that I want to invest a long time in, you know. But there's time for efficiency and cutting corners. And I think there's time for really, really, as you said, falling into a world, being a part of an experience. And that's what a novel does for you. It takes you, you know, my friend wrote an album that's one of the best of all time called Time Away from Time. And that's what I feel like a novel is. Not even because it's old, but it's literally time you're spending away from how we are typically spending time, which is just one thing after another. It's so fast. And you can't enjoy and appreciate and remember a novel. You can't have it become a part of your soul by going through it fast.
Yeah.
And it teaches you the value of patience and immersion. And I would say that extends, like when you read novels, I believe, like, I mean, even the reason I'm here with you now is immersion.
Yeah.
I don't think I would do this interviews, like this podcast, the way I do it without novels.
Yeah.
Because I want the time to be well spent. I want it to be quality. I want it to be immersive. And I think if you just read things that are fast and easy and cheap, then you start living your life a different way. I don't know. Maybe that's too far to
go.
No,
I think you're right. There are so many things about reading that you cannot replace with anything else. I mean, and it's fascinating to me because we created language. We created the written word at some point along the way. We didn't evolve always with this. But the fact that it makes sense to me that there's something primal about it, because at one point we were hunters and gatherers looking out there and interpreting the land and probably sharing information in certain ways with others. But we are also, I mean, who knows where the hell I'm going with this, but we're reading what somebody else's mind came up with, and we're also using our mind to analyze. I mean, it's a marriage of two minds. And the fact that I could read something written in 1705, and that's that dude's mind, it's alive, and I'm accessing it.
Yeah.
That's fascinating to
Oh,
me.
man. Yeah. Put it that way. That's wild.
Yeah. I mean, it's just as alive as it was when it penned that piece of writing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you brought that first one out. What do you got second?
I'm going to talk about Willa Cather now.
Let's do it. Yes.
She, Virginia born, from Winchester, the Winchester area, which is, I guess, an hour or two north of here.
Yeah.
And she moved out, like Jim Burden, moved out west to Nebraska, right?
Yep. Red Cloud.
Yeah. It was a toss-up for me between my Antony and the Professor's House.
Oh, the Professor's House, my favorite.
Professor's House.
I knew we were going to be friends. I mean, it was easy.
There's something so quiet about the Professor's House that is just so beautiful. I mean, Tom Outland's story in the middle, and just the whole discovery of this ancient lost civilization kind of, and And following the professor who's like a man lives with quiet dignity in this, and it's a very different setting from My Antonia and some of the others.
Yeah.
It's not frontier in the way that you would think about it. It's just a Midwestern town. And I can't
they don't
remember.
even name it. They just say an upper Midwestern college town.
Right.
So I'm like, is it Wisconsin? Minnesota? Like, you don't know. That's what I love. It's just there. It's a lonely place.
That book has done a lot for me. What I think I can use about both of these books is she's a modernist, literally. I also think of her as a realist. But when I think of modernists, I think of a lot of formal experimentation a lot of the time. You know, Faulkner, with his stream of consciousness, easy to label him a modernist, among other things.
Yeah.
But Hemingway condenses everything. Okay, modernist. Fitzgerald, modernist. Willa Cather is quiet about it. She will spin the best yarn, though, but she's not flashy. Mm-hmm. But the way she structures her novels is fascinating to me. Like, there's a whole chapter called Lena Lingard in this book, and she, like, you think the book is not about her at all,
but it totally is.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like so many. There's things that you could consider interruptions, and they're both in her smaller books, and then bigger ones like Song of the Lark, which, you know, Cather later on would admit like was probably too indulgent, you know, went on a little too long. But that's what I loved about the book is I was like, this fucking thing goes from Moonstone, Colorado to Chicago to Arizona to Germany. Like, I mean, and it ends in New York. Like it's such a big tale. But yeah, in My Antonia, it's like, and the professor's house, mm-hmm. There's these stories that come in the middle of it that are so surprising and yet so wonderful and so memorable. Even I talk about this with most people that love My Antonia, but the story about the wolves.
Oh, yes.
And the wedding in Russia.
That almost, in anybody else's hands, that is unbelievable. But in her hands, it somehow, you just take it.
Yeah.
You just take it.
Cather makes so many things work that you would not think would work. And you're not even thinking about should they work because they work so well. Yeah. And I think that's the Tom Outland story is a great example. It's like, it's a totally different novel.
Tom Outland's story in The Professor's House is kind of like, in a way, I see parallels between that and like My Snakefoot. It's just she tapped into something and you're like, wow, there's something there. Like there's kind of the foundation of the book.
And it makes so much sense when you look at how much eventually, like with Death Comes for the Archbishop, that the Southwest became a focal point of the stories because it was no longer on the fringes. It's like, man, I'm going to have these missionaries go down to, 1700s northern New Mexico, and I'm going to set a story there because, but everything connects. Like, and she also does really small text. Like My Mortal Enemy is one of the best books she's ever written. And it's like, it looks like a poetry book.
I got to check that out.
And it just comes and goes, but you're so just completely laid out by that book. It is so powerful. And you're like, how did that happen in 110 pages?
Yeah.
That doesn't even make any sense. But it's Cather, so of course she did it. So she can do it in 400 pages. She can do it in 100. It doesn't matter. But My Antonia is, I think, a interesting choice because, as I said before, you picked it out in that exile in fiction piece, which seems to be a common thread. And as you're saying, like there's the connection to Virginia too, and the being in two different places that you feel like you're from. Yeah,
two things that I really take from this in particular. Antonia is a character, representative of a land that is not even hers by birth. And she comes to mean that for the other people there. On the train ride, there's an introduction. The writer, we assume maybe Willa Cather or somebody like her, runs into Jim Burden on a train. And they start talking, because they haven't seen each other in years, they start talking about home. And I'm just going to read a little passage here. During that burning day when we were crossing Iowa, our talk kept returning to a central figure, a bohemian girl whom we had known long ago and whom both of us admired. More than any other person we remembered, this girl seemed to mean to us the country, the conditions, the whole adventure of our childhood. To speak her name was to call up pictures of people and places, to set a quiet drama going in one's brain. I had lost sight of her altogether, but Jim had found her again after long years, had renewed a friendship that meant a great deal to him, and out of his busy life, had set apart time enough to enjoy that friendship. His mind was full of her that day. He made me see her again, feel her presence, revived all my old affection for her. And I think there's just this inherent beauty, and you know, you were saying you didn't like Jim Burton before. I don't really either. He blows it. He
Right.
completely marries somebody who doesn't make him happy. He goes east instead of, and yet he's writing this whole wonderful book about the West.
Dude, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you agree with this because, well, first of all, I love that you picked that passage out because Antonia really is a force.
Yeah.
Like to the point that at the end of that book, right, he tells her, like, you have influenced my tastes.
Yeah.
You know, like the way I live, like everything, so much has been completely directly linked to you. And yet he forsakes that. He turns his back on the very thing that made his life feel most vital and true and beautiful and strong by taking a job out east and right, having a loveless marriage and kind of forgetting that like the spirit of that frontier was Antonia, but it could be any of us. You know, he just went away from it, but then he eventually misses that, right, when he comes back to it. But it just feels like, dude, you went from saying you're a pumpkin under the sun and you wish you were nothing more, like you wish to be nothing more, right? I mean, so much of my work is motivated by that passage about becoming some part of something entire. Mm-hmm. Because when you're that, it doesn't matter how small you are. You wish to be nothing more than that.
Yeah.
Just a pumpkin under the sun, right? To dissolve into something complete and great. And he had that.
I know.
He was part of the something entire, the complete and great, and he just let it go.
And he had opportunities, and this isn't even about like he didn't get the girl. It's like he didn't seem to realize, and it's so clear in the pages, the way they feel about each other is mutual, that there's a common, it's like there's just a great chemistry, and there's a lot of heartache in the book too.
Oh yeah, they've been through some shit together.
Yeah. It's a darker book every time I read it because there's so much loss. There are people who come to this country and don't make it psychologically. This doesn't become a happy place for them. And I'm not blaming that on anything else, but for whatever reason, this can never become home for them. Antonia seems to embrace it and become it.
Yeah, because she's so young.
Yeah.
You know, it kind of reminds me of that quote from the book where the country wasn't a country at all.
Yeah.
But the materials out of which a country are made. And it feels like Antonia is someone who will make a country, whereas her elders are people that are missing the country they came from. There is so much longing for the old country.
Oh, yeah.
And which plays into tragedy in this book. But it's that missing the familiar. This can never become that, and especially not out on the frontier. Yeah. It was impossible. There's nothing that will ever resemble where they came from.
Yeah.
And so when your culture is gone, your community, it's like it's a punishingly lonely landscape still. In the 90s, I lived in Nebraska for when I was really young for a year and a half, which I always say, obviously I didn't read Cather when I was that young, but the reason I attached to it is because her descriptions of the land and the feeling of the place, both in the bleakness, the emptiness, but also the beauty, the burning fire of a sunset in Nebraska is unlike anything in the world. And unless people are willing to see it for as beautiful as it is, then they're missing something, man. What a judgmental mistake to look at Nebraska as a place that isn't beautiful. But at the same time, especially then, I mean, those winters are long and it's windy and it's gray, monochrome.
Yeah.
And you can get lost out there easy.
Well, there's a book that I chose not to bring because I just felt like it didn't quite fit was the Tao Te Ching. Have you ever read that? The Chinese poetry, ancient Chinese poetry. There's one poem in there that says, there's only beautiness because there is ugliness. You got to take them together. Yeah. I mean, because otherwise beauty is meaningless if everything is beautiful. You know, so I think a place like Nebraska, the beauty is you almost savor it more
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm saying that about like Southside Virginia in my book as well. There's a
It's a good parallel.
There's a lush beauty to it that is anything but just comforting all the time, you know?
Yeah, and it's dangerous too.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
a lot of these places have real life-threatening issues.
Yeah.
And especially then in the frontier because they didn't know how to farm,
Right.
right? And then they were getting ripped off. And,
Well, and just
you know,
living in these sod houses was no laughing matter.
I actually didn't know those existed until this book.
It's,
So it was a good education on where people lived at that point. I mean, that's crazy to think.
I know.
Even then, it's like a damp, dark, kind of sad existence to be in one of those spots.
Yeah.
But yet there are just, so many moments of beauty. And that connection between Jim and Antonia, it's maybe because the younger generation felt like there was some momentum out here.
Yeah.
One embraced it. Jim kind of tried to get away from it for whatever reason. I still don't understand.
And we usually think of going east to the big city as progress, and it's totally not.
What do you lose by chasing that progress? Which is essentially going backwards, though. Like
Yeah.
if you look at the history of our country.
Yeah, he never, for as unsentimental as this book is, I mean, I think in its, portrayal of Nebraska and everything, I think Jim never follows this art. You know, other characters are sort of like one of the things that makes Antonia beautiful is her spontaneity, like her spirit. It's like something you can't put your finger on, but Jim just doesn't, like he knows it's there, but he doesn't really allow himself. And it's really heartbreaking every
And I think
time.
that's why he latches onto her and spends so much time is he wants to be around that. And I think all of us can think of people in our lives that have that sort of fire that we want to burn us, because we're not willing to be on fire ourselves or can't or for whatever reason. But she's just such a memorable figure because of the everydayness of her spirit, not the big moments.
Right.
I mean, it's literally just seeing her, like, and you can tell, like, that's.
And at the end, when we see her again, it's so well done because you could easily lose the book toward the end, as you can with any book. But the fact that she's a little bit beat up, the fact that she's weathered, she's not that beautiful young girl anymore, but she's still got it. She's not diminished.
And it's not until you feel it do you know it's there.
Yeah.
They could look at a picture and be like, oh, it's gone.
Yeah.
But certainly not. I mean, I could cry thinking about that ending. Like every time it gets me. Doesn't matter how many times I read it.
It's a hell of a book.
Yeah, man, I'm glad you brought it in. And it's just, I would recommend it to anybody. I would recommend Cather's whole set of books because the growth of her as an artist is really interesting to trace through all of her novels and short stories. And what a heck of a force.
Yeah, she's awesome. I think I'm going to go next to, and like I said, I might switch some of these out.
That's okay.
I want to talk about Faulkner.
We could not.
This is where it begins for me. The reason I've got two books. One is Go Down Moses, which is what the bear comes from. This book, Bear, Man, and God, has been out of print for a long time, I think. $2.95.
Oh my gosh, look how old that is.
And this is a copy that my dad gave me. It was used at the time, of course, for Christmas one year, Christmas 2000. He said, this is a book, and so talking about specifically the novella, The Bear. He said, this is something that you will read, you will be able to read at different times in your life, and it will mean more. It'll mean something different. And he's been right about that. I've read this a number of times, and I did not intend to read this. Like, he gave it to me. The day after Christmas, I was sick. I picked it up just so I could say thanks. I started it. I figured I'd put it right down. Something about it just held my attention. I wasn't really a reader at that point. I mean, I like stories, but I wasn't really a reader. Through The Bear specifically, Faulkner taught me a couple things, and the main one as a writer was that language could be a lens through which you see the world. It's not just a vehicle. It can make that world. And through his words, I mean, people have mixed feelings about Faulkner, and I totally get it, because at his worst, he's tedious.
Yeah.
I mean,
we got to be honest.
So he also is important for me as a Southerner to read this, because I saw a lot of parallels in terms of a feeling of attachment to a place, also the loss of the Southern wilderness, which he illustrates there. And also I'm drawn to I'm realizing this now. And you mentioned that book by Cather, My Mortal Enemy.
Yeah.
I haven't read that. And I think a great novella is hard to come by. And the Americans who have been able to do it, like we're going to get to one in a little bit, like the ones who are able to do it, it's an incredible thing. And it's such an interesting art form. It's not quite a novel, but you still, I mean, the fact that I can't wait to talk about Jim Harrison because the way he's able to make a novella feel epic is incredible.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to attempt to do something foolish and actually read something from Faulkner.
Heck yeah.
Because you never know if you're going to get the cadence right.
I love when people read. It's my favorite.
This is one of those stories that feels epic. It's an epic battle, but it's really about other things. It's about Ike McCaslin learning how to deal with his own personal past as a Southerner, how to live today with all of that. And I think that's just valuable. And it reminds me a lot of Huckleberry Finn too, which could easily be in this pile. Somebody who's raised a certain way, who transcends that, who figures out, I'm not going to be ashamed, but I'm also going to live my own life. That's valuable to me as a Southerner. So this is the first book. This is the book that made me want to write.
Wow.
Seriously, if I had not read The Bear, if my dad had not gotten me this novella, I never would have. I don't know if I would have become a writer, and so it really goes back to this. And this just shows you how much Faulkner can do in a freaking paragraph. Yes, a paragraph is a page, but he was 16. For 6 years now, he had been a man's hunter. For 6 years now, he had heard the best of all talking. It was of the wilderness, the big woods, bigger and older than any recorded document, of white man fatuous enough to believe he had bought any fragment of it, of Indian ruthless enough to pretend that any fragment of it had been his to convey, bigger than Major Despain and the scrap he pretended to, knowing better, older than old Thomas Sutpen, of whom Major Despain had it, and who knew better, older even than old Ikemetube, the Chickasaw chief, of whom old Sutpen had it, and who knew better in his turn. It was of the men, not white nor black nor red, but men, hunters, with the will and hardihood to endure, and the humility and skill to survive, and the dogs and the bear and the deer juxtaposed and relieved against it, ordered and compelled by and within the wilderness, in the ancient and unremitting contest, according to the ancient and immitigable rules, which voided all regrets and brooked no quarter, the best game of all, the best of all breathing, and forever the best of all listening, the voices quiet and weighty and deliberate for retrospection and recollection and exactitude, among the concrete trophies, the racked guns and the heads and the skins, in the libraries of townhouses or the offices of plantation houses, or, and best of all, in the camps themselves, where the intact and still warm meat yet hung, the men who had slain it sitting before the burning logs on hearths, when there were houses and hearths, or about the smoky blazing of piled wood in front of stretched tarpaulins when there were not. There was always a bottle present, so that it would seem to him that those fine, fierce instances of heart and brain and courage and wiliness and speed were concentrated and distilled into that brown liquor, which not women, not boys and children, but only hunters drank, drinking not of the blood they spilled, but some condensation of the wild immortal spirit, drinking it moderately, humbly even, not with the pagan's base and baseless hope of acquiring thereby the virtues of cunning and strength and speed, but in salute to them. Thus it seemed to him on this December morning, not only natural, but actually fitting that this should have begun with whiskey. I could go on, but, wow. And I think of this as, I can judge it in one part of my brain as over the top, almost theatrical, but the way he's able to conjure up a culture in a paragraph.
Yeah.
And all of the passing down of this land, which nobody ever owned. And this book, the novella, in large part, is about the destruction of and the development of the southern wilderness in this area. So it makes total sense that he's focusing on the ownership.
Yeah.
Because in the end, what does it mean? It's somebody.
It's made up.
Yeah, he talks later about puny men gnawing away at it, just little by little, just destroying the forest.
Yeah.
In a way, it's an ecological book in a really interesting way, and we see the trains kind of coming through. And
yeah, well, and I love that it traces that history of destruction.
Yeah,
because we can't understand a place without destruction and infiltration and seizure of it. Like that can explain even, I mean, or even like the avoidance of land. One of my favorite things about New Mexico, especially, but also Arizona, is just that it was, I'll never forget this. There was a senator from Indiana at the time, violently racist, you know. Some of this was he hated natives and Mexicans, so didn't want the Southwest to be annexed into the United States, but it was considered a scorned and desperate land. What farming could you do out there?
yeah,
Right? How could you build a boomtown? Literally, the whole thing was about how can we make this place ours in the way we would like it to be? How can we shape this place? And
Yeah.
the thing is, it's really hard to shape the desert
yeah,
because you can't cut down trees. I mean, you can't build massive cities. Still to this day, the biggest city in New Mexico is smaller than Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Oh, wow.
So the American story is that of that sort of conquest where it's like, oh, you get a railroad, you're in business.
Yeah,
You know, like if you can, and then you just chop down all the trees. Minnesota, there are ghost towns all over those rivers of where they just logged the shit out of it and left.
yeah. And we sort of see that logging starting to take place and it's in a way, the bear to me is a story of, I wouldn't say optimism, but somebody who's trying to do the right thing. Ike McCaslin.
Yeah.
He's bound by his conscience and he doesn't accept his family land.
Yeah.
And it's because of the curses of his forefathers. And it reminds me of Huckleberry Finn because Huckleberry Finn has every reason to be the worst kid ever.
Yeah.
To be the like most racist kid ever. But he learns, not because of how he was raised, but he learns because of his heart and because of his experience with Jim and everything, that there is no difference between races, not really. And he and Jim love each other. That's the way I read it.
Yeah.
And so when he makes the decision he says, all right, then I'll go to hell. Yeah. And that's the decision he makes.
Wow.
It's the same decision that Ike is sort of making. He's like, come what may, I am not taking this. And I mean, Huck Finn's might even be more profound.
Yeah.
So that part of the story is always meaningful to me as a Southerner. And as a Southerner who, who knows my history. Not everybody knows their history, and I'm lucky, but with it becomes a responsibility.
Yeah.
So there is a kind of like a kind of burden that you consider, and it's interesting to put that into writing. But the story itself, with the destruction of the wilderness, it's sad.
Yeah.
Because you just see it diminished.
Yeah. I mean, I think about living in the forest in North Carolina, and it doesn't even resemble what it was in the 1700s.
I'm sure.
Not even close. And I ache for that. The Bartram Travels, the letters, the book that he wrote in the 1700s coming through. And one of the saddest parts of that otherwise, really awesome book is him acknowledging, as a white man from Philadelphia in Cherokee for so long, going through those mountains, meeting these people, spending time there, is that he knew the way America was going to go. And he knew there was a different way, one that was just and humane and could keep places beautiful and wild. And we just couldn't do it. And he knew that. And then he ends up going back to Philadelphia and never really leaves his estate, his family estate. And I think because he knew, like, I don't want to partake in this empire. So anyway, it's just, there's a sadness, but yeah, there's a hope in it too.
And there's more hope in it than in a lot of Faulkner.
Yeah. Good point.
But yeah, it's a sad thing to see the bear because they've got sort of this understanding, and then the bear, I think, steps out of line more or less as the hunters see it. And he kills an animal. I can't remember what kind of animal. It might be a cow. It might be a pig. And they're like, okay, he's sort of violated the rules. There's all this talk of the rules, like as if bear and man have agreed to some contract.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Because of where that book fell in my writing evolution, it's got to be in there.
Yeah, of course. I'm so glad you brought it. I knew how much of an impact he had on you.
Yeah.
And you can tell even in your own writing, there is a spirit of Faulkner in there. No doubt.
And I'm hoping it's only the spirit, because I think when you see people who emulate too closely a particular author, and I think probably in the beginning that would have been a danger, but you see people who what I see a lot of is people who try to emulate Cormac McCarthy, and you can always tell.
Losing game.
You can always tell.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think the great thing about picking 6 books here is like, all right, various influences here. And who knows how they made it into the novel. It might not have been conscious. But yeah, I cannot ignore Faulkner because of his place in Southern literature and his place in my own evolution.
Yeah, man. I'm glad you brought him in.
Thanks. I'm going to switch a couple out.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. But I do want to talk about Jim Harrison.
Well, let's go there first, because I know you're itching to get to it.
Yeah. Jim Harrison, he's one of the few. See, Faulkner was a failed poet.
Yeah.
And if you read some of his poetry, you understand why. But if you read Jim Harrison's poetry, you're like, damn, he's the real deal. And of course, Faulkner is too. But Jim Harrison's poetry, economy of the line, makes its way into his prose. And just the beauty of his descriptions. And I mean, you could go anywhere with this, but I've got one small paragraph that I can choose from.
Sweet.
And, so I've chosen Legends of the Fall. It's a series of 3 novels. Of course, Legends of the Fall is the title novella, and everybody knows about that, if not the novella, the movie.
Yeah.
Which is very different. Well, I think the book is way better, but Revenge and The Man Who Lost His Name, or Who Gave Up His Name, The Man Who Gave Up His Name, are also really wonderful. I'm going to just talk about Revenge, but the whole thing is great. But and as I was saying earlier, the way he's able to make it feel epic, minimal dialogue, wonderful description.
Yeah.
And almost like scientific biological poetry with which he describes things. And I mean, the way he starts Revenge is we find a body, and we're looking at it from the natural world. And I'm just going to read that, and then I'll read one other short paragraph.
Sweet.
You could not tell if you were a bird descending, and there was a bird descending, a vulture, if the naked man was dead or alive. The man didn't know himself, and the bird was tentative when he reached the ground and made a croaking sideways approach, askance and looking off down the chaparral in the arroyo, as if expecting company from the coyotes. Carry-on was shared not by the sharer's design, but by a pattern set before anyone knew there were patterns. The vulture had just eaten a rattler, run over by a truck outside of Nacozari de Garcia, a little town well off the tourist run, about 100 miles from Nogales. The coyotes would follow the vulture's descent, out of curiosity whether or not they were hungry from the night's hunt. As the morning thermals developed, more vultures would arrive until the man's dying would have an audience. As the dawn deepened into mid-morning and the heat dried and caked the blood on the man's face, the blood lost most of its fresh coppery odor. The man was dying fitfully now, more from the heat and dehydration than from his injuries. An arm twisted askew, chest a massive blue bruise, one cheekbone crushed in with a hematoma rising like a purple sun, his testicles inflated from a groining, and a head wound that darkened the sand and pebbles and drew him down into his near-fatal sleep of coma. And just the way you kind of zero in on this, and it seems dispassionate, and yet totally invested. I mean, it's like, you will listen to me.
Yeah.
you will read this.
It's so interesting when an author has that command.
I mean,
without being commanding,
I know.
Oh my God. I'm glad you brought in Jim. So John Evans.
Yeah,
at
I
Lemuria,
love John Evans.
He loves Jim Harrison.
Oh,
so,
really?
I mean, I had to read Jim Harrison, if not for any reason than to honor that John Evans loves him so much. So,
What a great guy.
yeah. I would literally have such a worse life if I never met John. So
He's an awesome dude.
I'm sure he'll appreciate this selection.
I think Lemuria might be my favorite bookstore.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
I mean, truly, other than the one I work at,
yeah.
Lemuria.
And I haven't been there yet, so I can't really say.
You're going to get it. You're going to understand why I love Lemuria so much when you're at City Lights. They are kindred spirits.
That's awesome.
One in the mountains, one in Mississippi. But yeah, Lemuria is, come on, you can't beat it.
That's awesome. The other I want to read is when Cochran, the protagonist, gets his first opportunity to talk to a woman named Miria, who is actually with a cartel gangster. He runs a cartel named Tibby. Cochran's about to get himself into some trouble, and we realize that's how he ended up in the desert. But there's just something about they start quoting poetry to each other. She walks into the library where Cochran is thumbing through a book of poetry, and I'm just going to read this little scene and how much Harrison is able to do in such a short amount of time. She tipped the book in his hands, reading its title upside down. She smiled and quoted from Lorca. I want to sleep the dream of apples, far from the tumult of cemeteries. He thought he had never heard anything more beautiful, and stared at the ceiling in unaffected schoolboy blush, and quoted back from the same poet. Your belly is a battle of roots. Your lips are a blurred dawn. Under the tepid roses of the bed, the dead moan, waiting their turn. She stared at him a moment, and his temples pounded witlessly. She flushed and looked away, and he wished to say something stupid to ease the tension, but could find no words. She tilted her chin upward, as if looking at some faraway object, and he looked at her throat, thinking he could detect an odor somewhere between clover and an orange. He dropped the book to the floor, and she laughed and walked away. He swallowed a goblet full of brandy, and rose in his throat and brought tears to his eyes.
Whew.
I mean,
come on, man.
And throwing Lorca in there too doesn't help anything.
Gosh.
I mean, Jim Harrison, what he's able to do with time, Faulkner is able to do with time as well, but I might say that Harrison does it certainly more economically, but you feel that Faulkner is truly experimenting with how much he can do with language, and Jim Harrison's kind of comfortable. He's delivering it in a way that in some cases is less clunky. And Faulkner at his best is hard to beat. Faulkner like I said, I mean, he can be tedious as well. And Harrison doesn't seem to have that bone in his body. Like he's okay with this just terse poetry. And it's just really awesome.
Oh, it's so good. I mean, it makes me realize I also need to read more of Jim Harrison. Just no pun intended, but legend.
Yeah, he really is.
And I got to send you, I sent this to John a few years ago, but there is a French documentary that I found where they go up to northern Michigan and interview Jim Harrison. So, is
it in English? I mean, I assume no, really.
Yeah, these are French guys.
Wow.
Which I talked about this with Charles Baxter, but there are some American writers that have even bigger and fan bases in other countries.
I totally,
like David Joy has a huge fan base in France. So they go there to tour because it's always going to be a hoot. And, I think France, I guess, really loves the certain, styles of writing in certain regions in America. So
I've signed with David Joy's French publisher.
Sweet.
And Sonatine, and they are awesome.
That makes sense.
So my book's coming out in August in France.
Ooh. That's so cool.
And the cover's pretty awesome.
That's the thing. I love seeing different covers that end up in different countries because, it's just like interesting to see the take that people have on the story on the front. So gosh, that's so cool. Oh, so what about number 5?
West with the Night, Beryl Markham, nonfiction. Switching it up here a little bit.
Okay.
As I said, my grandfather was a pilot. in the early, in more or less the early days of flying.
Yeah.
And he was also a daredevil. He was a quiet daredevil. He took my mom up in a plane once. I don't think he ever owned his own plane. Somehow he was able to borrow when he needed. I remember, so I lived in Jackson, Mississippi for a year as a kid. I've actually got family down there, so I've always had a Mississippi connection.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And I remember my grandparents flying to see us. They just flew.
That's wild.
And I mean, he's like, however old he was at the time, he would have been in his 60s.
Yeah.
He would have been 65, and he was flying this little old plane. But he took, my mom was going to a dance. She was wearing a nice dress and everything, and probably like when she was in college or something. And he was like, "Yeah, we'll just go up for a quick." And she was like, "Nothing fancy." He did everything. And when she got out of the plane, she threw up on the wing.
Oh my God.
But he also rode a motorcycle. He brought back a wartime Harley from World War II. He flew in the Pacific.
Dang.
My great uncle, who grew up here, my grandmother's brother, who's no longer alive, was his roommate at UVA before my grandfather dropped out. He didn't finish college. Is one great regret. But my great uncle remembered vividly riding on the back of my grandfather's motorcycle and being terrified because one time he came up next to a Mack truck on the highway and he said, "Lean." And they leaned and they went under like part of the Mack truck and came back out.
Oh my God.
That's the kind of guy
I would never ride with him again.
That's the kind of guy he was. So flying has always fascinated me. In the early days of flying as well. And Beryl Markham is just an incredible writer. I guess her father was British, but she was either born in Kenya or lived or was just from there after they moved. But she describes Africa, the not only the necessity of flying in Africa, but the fact that so few people actually had planes. So everybody's existence was reduced to just whatever was paved or whatever you could. Nothing was interconnected.
Wow.
And this whole memoir is wonderful, but I especially love the parts about flying.
Yeah.
And she starts, and I'll just start the entire book just really briefly here. Oh, and she was famous for flying across the Atlantic from Europe to America. So she was the first person to ever do that.
Wow.
But she starts the entire book saying, "How is it possible to bring order out of memory? I should like to begin at the beginning, patiently, like a weaver at his loom. I should like to say this is the place to start. There can be no other. But there are 100 places to start, for there are 100 names, Mwanza, Serengeti, Nungwe, Molo, Nakuru. There are easily 100 names, and I can begin best by choosing one of them, not because it is the first, nor of any importance in a wildly adventurous sense, but because here it happens to be, turned uppermost in my logbook. After all, I am no weaver. Weavers create. This is remembrance, revisitation, and names are keys that open corridors no longer fresh in the mind, but nonetheless familiar in the heart." So she's just opening her flight logbook and saying, "Where do I begin this memoir? I'll pick here because it's open."
Wow.
And
I love that. Oh.
and just, any artist is going to ask those questions, but not many can pull it off.
Yeah. Oh, man. See, I love when people do that. I'm just going to do this.
So she talks a lot about the frontier, the frontier of Africa, which is still, a lot of it frontier, but there's one thing that really just illustrates her strengths as a writer, aside from just that opening. She talks about flying at night over Africa.
Whoa.
And if you think of, and most people, including me, would be like, well, okay, it's flying overnight. But the way she describes it, you're like, oh yeah, you can't see anything. Yeah. So she says, 350 miles can be no distance in a plane, or it can be from where you are to the end of the earth. It depends on so many things. If it is night, it depends on the depth of the darkness. and the height of the clouds, the speed of the wind, the stars, the fullness of the moon. It depends on you if you fly alone, not only on your ability to steer your course or to keep your altitude, but upon the things that live in your mind while you swing suspended between the earth and the silent sky. Some of those things take root and are with you long after the flight itself is a memory. But if your course was over any part of Africa, even the memory will remain strong.
Oh man, I need to read this.
This is a hell of a book.
Oh my gosh.
And the fact that, I don't read a lot of memoirs, but this is great.
Neither do I.
This is great.
I'm very picky compared to fiction with what I read memoir. I mean, part is because I just love novels so much. But there's also a lot of memoir that I find dreadfully boring.
Yeah.
And not too ordered, trying to make too much sense of something. And man, that particular passage just locked me in.
It's poetry.
I'm in. I'm getting that book when I get home.
It's a great book. It's a really great book.
Oh, thank you. I can't believe I hadn't heard of this before. That is incredible. Oh man, I'm going to think about that. Just the thoughts that occupy your mind between the land and the silent sky.
They're just lost.
Whew. I'm going there.
I'm going to pick.
So are we at 6?
We
All
are
right.
at 6.
Let's do one more of the books on the bed.
I'm going to talk about Joe by Larry Brown. There are a couple that I could have picked. I mean, Father and Son is really powerful as well. And to me, the two, I just picked this one. There's something about Joe that it's just brutal. And I don't mean that in celebrating the brutal, but there's just a way that, Larry Brown, you see him when he starts out. Facing the Music, the collection, shows so much curiosity and experimentation, but I don't think he's landing everything. I think Facing the Music is a hell of a story. There's some of those in there that I'm glad he's got in there, but they don't always work as well. But when you get to Joe, when you get to Father and Son, when you get to Joe in particular, there's something about just how he can control. He examines his main character, Joe. He just watches, he goes through him balancing his checkbook, and I'm there. I'm just like into it. And it's amazing.
That's when you know you're good.
Gosh. Talk about the command. He has that quality of Jim Harrison's. He's like, you will listen to me now. Sit down and read. And you sort of do it. And despite the size of this book, it just flies for me.
Yeah.
And it's just, Joe is one of those characters who I don't necessarily like, but he's real. He's real. And I mean, at one point his daughter says in the book, she's like, Mama said, you never changed any of our diapers. He's like, that's right. And she says, why not? And he said, I guess I didn't want to. And I mean, that's what he says.
But that's the thing is there's an honesty and unlikability.
I mean,
I can despise a person that I respect that they're honest.
Yeah.
I wish they were different than they are, but you can't say they're lying. And there's something actually quite attractive about that in a story. And God, that's a great exchange.
And it's just, there's something about the book, despite its size, that is, it's hard to read because some of it is so hard to look at. But that's who Larry Brown was, and that's what he did. But he's another one that a lot of people could emulate unsuccessfully, I think, just trying to be either violent or just gritty. And although people have said those things about my book, I think a lot of people, I mean, my hope is that Holy City is its own thing and that it's, I get tired of that term, gritty. It's true. It's like, I appreciate it.
I understand it though.
But like grit lit, count me out.
Yeah, don't. Because I actually don't even understand what the hell that means.
Yeah.
I don't.
I think it's supposed to, I think it's kind of like what it suggests to me is just, we're gonna get as raw as we can here. And I'm just not all that interested in playing that game of trying to be more and more violent or aggressive or
because I don't think to me like raw or exposed doesn't mean violent, And
right,
I also think
that's good. Yeah, that's right.
I think you can be raw in like a Rust Belt
oh yeah
tire factory and it not be violent.
I agree.
Right? I think it's, to me, there's an emotional revelation of characters that to me feels raw, because so much of what is great about Will's character is not what happens, but what's inside him.
Yeah.
So much what's great about the backstories are the love between people as much as the feuds or the rivalries. And so you get don't get me wrong. You can't say there's no grit, I suppose, in your story.
Sure,
and
sure.
obviously
Of
Larry
course.
Brown, but to reduce it to that is a disservice to the stories you write.
I agree.
100%.
He just doesn't waste time. He somehow just so cleanly presents this, and the story just unfolds, and you're with it. He's in total control the whole time. Really just a great book. And I've actually been to his old house.
Oh, that's so cool.
Like his son, Shane, is a friend. And I also have a friend from Oxford, Mississippi, born and raised. And he knew Larry Brown because Larry Brown was a friend of his dad's.
Wow.
And Larry Brown had these like white Python cowboy boots or something toward the end.
Yeah.
My friend said to him, his name is Zach Tudor. He said to Larry, he's like, man, nice boots. And Larry said, you can have them. And he died not long after. And of course, he never got the boots because,
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm telling you this from Zach Tudor, but he's also got other stories about Larry.
Oh, I'm sure.
And you know, according to everybody who knew him, like Larry was also a really funny guy.
Yeah.
Really funny.
Yeah, I'm surprised actually that no one's picked a Larry Brown book yet.
Yeah, it's really good. And I've just got a small paragraph here.
Yeah.
Large paragraph. So Joe gets drunk one night and he ends up with a woman. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you know, he's sort of going through, I think we don't get the description of it, but some sort of crisis, like trying to figure out some things. And anyway, that's how I read it or how I remember it. And he ends up with this woman, doesn't remember what she looks like. She's not there when he wakes up, and she's got a really nice house. And he wakes up and he's like, all right, I'm going to get the hell out of here. Before, like, he's like, I'm afraid of, you know, what she looks like. And then she comes in and she's beautiful. And she comes back from the airport because she was just dropping her kids off. And they're flying away and they spend the day together. And he's got like everything in this moment. And then he decides to leave it. That night, they had drinks on a patio. She and her children had built themselves. Porterhouses sputtering with small yellow flames leaped in the gas grill. She kept a careful eye on the steaks and cooked them just the way he liked them, bleeding red juices when she cut them with the knife. He held hands with her at times, something he hadn't done in a long time and had thought he'd never do again. Long after midnight, he held her in bed while her head rested on his chest. He listened to the slow, measured sound of her breathing and wondered how any man could give up something like her. The sculpted ivory of her torso, where the sun had not touched it, made her legs and arms look black in the darkness of the room. Her lacquered fingernails rested lightly on his stomach. He dreamed again, but not of childhood fields. He dreamed of the prison yard and of clearing the roadside grass with sickles, and the horses and the guards rode, standing over him, drooling their slobber down on his bare back, and of enduring it all, watching the days tick off the calendar, one by one, and the hot Mississippi sun bearing down on the truck patches, him on his knees pulling tomatoes and beans and peas, of the heavy wire mesh fences that fenced in the inmates, of the smoky lights that loomed in the darkness outside the camps, where in the black towers the unseen guards with their rifles sat watching for movement in the packed dirt beside the buildings. He twisted in his sleep, his legs moving. Near dawn he got up and put on his clothes and gathered up his things and let himself out of the house quietly, locking the door firmly behind him, not looking back, getting in his truck and turning on the parking lights, backing out of the driveway slowly, easing into the street, pulling the headlights on and reaching down for the last lukewarm beer in the cooler, eyeing the whiskey that was still on the seat. The gas tank was half full, more than enough to get home.